My name is Clara Voss, and I was 34 years old the night my father told me at the dinner table that I no longer existed in his estate. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look away from his plate. He just said it the way someone might mention the weather. I updated everything. You should know. I set my fork down. I didn't ask what everything meant. I didn't ask what I had done, or what had changed, or whether there was any path back. I just nodded and said I understood, and I drove home along the same county road I had driven my whole life, and I did not call anyone. He died 6 weeks later. A stroke, fast, nothing prolonged. And at the title office on a gray Thursday morning, with my brothers arranged along one side of a laminate conference table and me on the other, a woman named Patricia Holt opened a manila folder, and she found 2 instruments on file. She read the first one. Then she found the second one. She looked at the date on the second one, and she read it once to herself before she said anything out loud. Then she said, "The second one is dated after the first." My brother Marcus asked her to stop reading. She did not stop. Welcome back to channel, where quiet people let the paperwork do the shouting. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and drop a comment below telling me what brought you today. I read every single one. I want to start at the beginning because nothing that happened at that title office makes any sense unless you understand what kind of family we were and what kind of daughter I had always been. My father, Gerald Voss, was not a warm man. He was not the kind of father who came to school plays or remembered birthdays without being reminded. What he was, consistently and without exception, was a man who respected work. He had built a small but serious contracting business out of nothing in the 1980s, and by the time I was old enough to understand what he did, he had 7 full-time employees and a reputation in our county as someone who showed up, did the job correctly, and did not need to be chased for explanations. I grew up watching him that way, and I think without ever deciding to, I became the same. I am a licensed land surveyor. I have been one since I was 26. I work for a firm out of Millhaven in the eastern part of the state, and my job is to go out into fields and floodplains and disputed boundary lines and measure things exactly. I do not estimate. I do not round. I find the true edge of a thing, and I mark it. My colleagues have described me, not unkindly, as someone who is more comfortable with a grade rod than with a conversation, and I think that is probably fair. What that job has given me, beyond a salary and a set of technical skills, is a specific relationship with evidence. In surveying, you do not argue about where a line is. You find the original monument, the iron rod, the concrete cap, the chiseled square in the stone, and you measure from it. The monument does not care what either party believes. The monument does not care what was verbally agreed to at a family dinner 20 years ago, or what the neighbor's uncle swore he remembered, or what the tax map seems to suggest. The monument is the monument. It controls. Everything else is noise until you find it. I think that is why I became the kind of person who waits, who does not argue about what is true before there is something to measure from. People have mistaken that quality for passivity, for softness, for not caring enough to fight. What it actually is precision. You do not throw yourself against a line that has not yet been established. You wait for the mark. I want you to hold that because it matters to everything that came after. My 2 brothers are Marcus and Joel. Marcus is 4 years older than me and works in commercial insurance. He has a wife named Diane and 2 kids in elementary school and a house in the suburbs of the nearest city, and he has always carried himself with the particular confidence of a firstborn son who is told, early and often, that he was the responsible one. That framing was not wrong. Exactly, Marcus is responsible, in the sense that he shows up to things and follows through on commitments and keeps his yard maintained. But there is a version of responsible that is really about control, about being the one who manages the situation, and Marcus had always leaned toward that version without, I think, fully recognizing it. Joel is 2 years younger than me. He is the most social of the 3 of us. The one who can talk to anyone, who remembers names and asks follow-up questions and makes people feel attended to in the immediate moment. I have always thought Joel would have been excellent at sales if he had channeled it in that direction. What he actually did was drift into real estate management, not as an agent but as a landlord, slowly accumulating a small portfolio of rental properties in the city he lived in, using a combination of his own savings and, starting in 2011, a private loan from my father that allowed him to put down payments on his first 2 units. That loan was never fully repaid, as far as I ever knew. This was not a secret, exactly, but it was also never discussed. It existed in the particular category of family financial arrangements that everyone is aware of and no one names directly, because naming it would require someone to decide whether it was a gift or a debt, and deciding that would require someone to be declared wrong, and no one in my family was good at being declared wrong. I had never borrowed money from my father. I had never asked to. When I needed capital to buy into a small equity share at my firm 6 years ago, I took out a conventional loan, negotiated the terms myself, and paid it back on schedule over 36 months. My father knew about it because I told him, not because I needed his input, but because I was still in the habit at that point of keeping him informed about significant things in my life. He said that was good. That was the whole conversation. I don't think he understood that I was, in some indirect way, demonstrating something to him. I don't think it registered as anything other than a piece of news. I have spent time in the years since thinking about whether that was my failure or his. I don't have a clean answer. I think it was probably both. I think I believed that living the way I lived, carefully, independently, without asking for anything, was a language my father could read.
I think I was wrong about that.
Or I was wrong about whether reading it would change anything. My mother had died when I was 19, a car accident, fast and senseless the way those things are, and after that it was just the four of us, my father, Marcus, Joel, and me. We were not the kind of family that processed things out loud. We were the kind of family that kept going. That was its own form of strength, maybe, but it also meant that a great deal went unsaid for a very long time, and unsaid things in a family have a way of calcifying. They stop being things that could theoretically be addressed and become instead the fixed geology of the household, the shapes everyone navigates around without acknowledging. The fixed geology of our household included, among other things, the assumption that I was fine, that I did not need, that I had made myself sufficient in a way that absolved everyone else of the obligation to check. I let that happen. I am aware of that now. There were moments over the years where I could have said, I am here too. I would like to be considered. I did not say those things, partly because I did not want to seem like I was asking, and partly because I genuinely believed that the record of my behavior spoke for itself, and that people who paid attention would see it. The person who paid attention was my grandmother. Edna Voss was my father's mother. She was 81 years old when this story begins, and she had lived in Crestfield County her entire life, in the farmhouse her husband had built on the land they had bought together in the early 1960s with money saved over 7 years of working jobs that offered no particular dignity, but a reliable check. She was not a sentimental woman. She was not the kind of grandmother who kept a tin of cookies on the counter and dispensed wisdom in greeting card phrases. She was sharp and direct, and she kept her own counsel, and she had seen enough of the world to know exactly what she was looking at when she looked at something. She and I had a routine that had started after my grandfather died 8 years before the story begins. I drove out to Crestfield on Sunday mornings. We had coffee in her kitchen. We talked about practical things, the state of the land, the condition of the outbuildings, what needed to be done, and what could wait. Occasionally we talked about the family, though she was sparing about that, careful in the way that people who have watched families for a long time are careful. She did not editorialize. She observed. The property she lived on was 43 acres of Crestfield County land, including the farmhouse, a barn that had been converted into storage decades ago, a working well, and a small outbuilding that my grandfather had used as a workshop. The land had been in the family since the 1960s. A rezoning corridor along the county road that ran past the eastern boundary had quietly changed the character of its value over the preceding decade, and when the property was appraised the year before Grandma Edna died, it came back at just over $2 million. Nobody talked about that number. It wasn't a dinner table subject. It was just the land. It was just Grandma Edna's place. But Grandma Edna knew the number. She had requested the appraisal herself. She had read it, filed it, and made her own assessment of what it meant and what it required from her. I know this now.
I did not know it then.
What I knew then was that she sometimes put her hand briefly on my arm when I was leaving, and she said small, precise things. You are steady, Clara. Don't let anyone convince you that steady is ordinary. Or, the people who show up are usually the people who get treated like they'll keep showing up whether or not it's acknowledged. Watch for that. I stored these sentences without fully unpacking them, the way you store a measurement you don't yet know what to do with. I knew they were pointing at something. I didn't know what. About 3 years before she died, she began having conversations with an attorney. She mentioned it once, one Sunday, setting down her cup and saying in exactly the tone she might use to report that the barn roof needed patching. I had a man come out from Hartfield, Robert Keene. We got some paperwork sorted. I asked if she needed anything. She said she didn't. I did not push because she had not invited it, and I had been trained by my whole life to respect the signals people gave about what they wanted addressed and what they wanted left alone. Robert Keene had an office in Hartfield, which was the county seat. He handled property and estate matters for clients across the region. He was not connected to anyone in our immediate family. My father did not know him. Marcus and Joel had never heard of him. He was someone my grandmother had sought out herself, through a recommendation from her neighbor, whose own estate he had handled some years before, and she had dealt with him entirely on her own terms. She died in the spring of the year before my father died. She passed at home in the farmhouse, which is what she had said she wanted. I was the one who sat with her in her final days, driving out to Crestfield not just on Sundays but on weeknights too, sleeping in the spare room when it seemed like she shouldn't be alone, making sure she had what she needed and that what she needed was being noted and managed. I did not announce that I was doing this. I did not track the hours or make sure anyone knew. I just did it the same way I had always done things because it needed doing, and I was there. Marcus sent flowers when she died. A large arrangement from a good florist with a card that said the right things. Joel drove up for the service and gave a short, warm eulogy that made several people cry. He drove back the same afternoon. My father stood at the graveside with his hands clasped in front of him and said she had lived a full life, which was true, and which was the most he was able to give anyone, and I had long since stopped expecting more. Her estate passed as her primary will directed, the land and the house to my father, her only living child. That was the instrument everyone knew about. That was the one read at the time of her death, filed with the probate court, signed off on by all parties. The 43 acres became Gerald Voss's property, and that seemed to be the end of it. My father updated his own estate documents shortly afterward, and then he told me at dinner. Block 2, the betrayal in full, expanded. To understand what the dinner table moment actually was, you need to understand what had been building toward it because it did not come from nowhere. There was a structure underneath it, a set of decisions that had been made over months, and by the time my father said those words, the structure was already complete. I just hadn't been shown it yet. 3 months before my father died, he called Marcus and Joel together for a meeting. Not at the house, at Dennis Farrow's office, which was the estate attorney my father had used for general legal matters for about a decade. Dennis Farrow was a competent man who handled wills and property transfers and business succession matters for clients in the county, and my father trusted him in the minimal, practical way he trusted anyone. Farrow did what he said he would do, and he did not complicate things unnecessarily. I was not invited to this meeting. I did not know it was happening. I found out about it 2 weeks later, not from my father and not from Marcus, but from Joel, in the sideways way our family delivered significant information, as a subordinate clause in a conversation that had ostensibly started about something else. Joel had called to ask whether I still had a key to the Crestfield property and whether I might be able to check on something there the following weekend. We talked about that for a few minutes, and then he said, almost as a transition, "Oh, also, Dad had us come into Farrow's office a few weeks ago to talk through his estate stuff. I figured you knew." I did not know. I kept my voice level and asked what had been discussed. Joel explained it to me the way you explain something to someone who is probably going to be fine with it, but who you are slightly braced for anyway, with a kind of preemptive reasonableness, a framing that anticipated objection and tried to neutralize it before it arrived. My father had decided, Joel said, that the Crestfield property would pass jointly to Marcus and Joel when he died. This was based on his assessment of everyone's situations and needs. Marcus had 2 kids and a mortgage. Joel had the rental properties and the loan outstanding. The property was the major asset, and dividing it 3 ways would complicate its management or force a sale, and Dad thought it made more sense to keep it in the hands of the people who would actively manage it. And me? I asked. Joel said that my father's feeling was that I was in a solid position, that I had my career, my equity share in the firm, my own savings, that I had always been self-sufficient, that I didn't need it the way they did, that the townhouse and the business accounts, which would cover final expenses and leave something for Marcus and Joel, were intended to take care of the remaining obligations, and that I would be, his word, as Joel reported it, fine. I absorbed this. I did not respond immediately. I was doing what I always do, which is hold the information and let it settle, and try to find the true shape of it before I react to the surface. What I found, when I let it settle, was this. My father had held a formal meeting with his 2 sons, with an attorney present, to restructure his estate. He had done so without telling me, without inviting me to offer any input, without so much as a phone call afterward to say, "Here is what I have decided and why." The decision had been made in that room, and I had not been a participant. I had been a subject, a factor considered and accounted for in the way you account for a fixed cost, and then set aside. Did either of you say anything? I asked Joel. About me not being there? There was a pause that was longer than it needed to be. Marcus said it might seem uneven, Joel said. But Dad was pretty clear about what he wanted.
He's sharp, Clara.
It's his estate. We didn't really feel like it was our place to push back on his logic. I understood what that meant. It meant that Marcus had noted, briefly, that this might create a problem, and then had decided that noting it once was sufficient, that having registered the concern absolved him of any obligation to press it. It meant that Joel had not noted it at all. It meant that both of them had sat in that office and accepted a decision that benefited them significantly, and that the limit of their advocacy for me had been Marcus saying, once, that it might seem uneven. I did not say any of this to Joel. I said I appreciated him telling me. I said I would think about it. I said goodbye, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of a hardware store for about 10 minutes, watching people come and go with bags of supplies for projects I could not imagine, and I let myself feel the shape of what I had just learned without doing anything about it. The honest thing I can tell you is that part of me was not entirely surprised. That is a strange thing to admit. I had not known it was coming in any specific sense. I had not expected to be excluded, had not been braced for it as an explicit outcome, but when it arrived, it had the quality of something that fits a pattern you didn't know you were tracking. All those years of being fine. All those years of being the one who managed and showed up and didn't ask for anything and being treated accordingly, as someone who could be depended upon not to require anything. I had made it very easy for my father to decide I would be fine without anything, because I had always been fine without anything, and he was a man who worked from the evidence in front of him without looking behind it. I also knew, and this is harder to admit, that I was not certain what I could do. My father was competent.
He was of sound mind.
He was entitled to structure his estate as he chose, and he had done so with proper legal counsel, and the fact that the outcome was unfair did not make it invalid. I was not going to contest a will on the grounds that my father loved me less than I deserved. That is not a legal claim. That is just grief. So I waited. I worked. I drove out to Crestfield on Sunday mornings, the farmhouse now technically my father's, though it felt exactly the same as it always had, the same light through the same kitchen windows, the same particular quality of silence that a property develops over decades of the same family inhabiting it. I walked the land sometimes, habit more than purpose, and I thought about my grandmother, and I let the geometry of the situation sit unresolved in the part of my mind I keep for things I can't measure yet. Then my father had the dinner table conversation. It was a Sunday. I had come over at his invitation. He called occasionally, never frequently, and the invitations were sparse enough that declining them felt wrong. He made a meal from a recipe he had been using for 30 years, a roast with root vegetables, and we sat across from each other and talked about the business which he was winding down and about the weather and about a property dispute 2 streets over that he had opinions about. He was not a man who struggled to fill silence, but he was also not a man who moved quickly toward difficult subjects. We were nearly done eating when he set his fork down and said it. I updated everything. You should know. I looked at him. He was looking at his plate or past it at some middle distance that was not the table and not me. Everything, I said. The estate. The documents. It's all sorted. And I'm not in them.
He looked at me then.
Just briefly. You've always managed, he said. You know that. I said I did. He picked up his fork. That was the end of it. I drove home on the county road with the windows up and the heat on and the radio off. I did not call anyone. I did not turn around and go back and try to have a different version of the conversation. There was nothing to say that would change what was filed with Dennis Farrow, and my father had just told me, as plainly as he was capable of telling me anything, that the decision was made. He had done me the small courtesy of not making me find out at the reading. He had told me first privately so that I could arrange my face before the formal moment came. It was, I thought, about as much consideration as he knew how to give. He died 6 weeks later. A stroke, early on a Wednesday morning, fast and without warning, the way some deaths are. A neighbor saw his lights on at an unusual hour and knocked, and then called for help, and by the time I got the call it was already settled. There was nothing to sit with, no prolonged goodbye, no chance for any last conversation I might have wanted to have. He was gone, and what was left was the paperwork, which was how he had always communicated the things that mattered most anyway. Dennis Farrow's office arranged the title meeting. Marcus arranged the appointment. I arrived first and sat on the far side of the table and waited, and when Marcus and Joel came in they arranged themselves on the other side with the ease of people who know what a room contains and feel comfortable in it, and I sat across from them and waited for Patricia Holt to open her folder. Block 5, Social/Financial Cascade plus Pleading Reversal, expanded. The weeks after that meeting were the most complicated and, in some ways, the most clarifying of my life. Marcus did get Dennis Farrow on the phone. He made the call before he had left the parking lot outside the title office. I know because I saw him through the window as I was gathering my things, standing beside his car with his phone to his ear, and his posture the particular posture of a man making a call he believes will fix something. It did not fix anything. Dennis Farrow told him the same thing Patricia Holt had. The codicil was a properly executed conditional reversionary interest, filed by a licensed attorney at Robert Keene's firm, notarized, dated, witnessed, in the public record for 3 years. The condition had been met precisely. There was nothing on the face of it that was ambiguous. There's nothing in here that's ambiguous, Dennis Farrow told Marcus. I know this because Marcus told me so himself about a week later, in a conversation I had not expected to have. He called and asked if I could meet him in town at the coffee shop on Meridian Street, and I went because I am not the kind of person who refuses those meetings. If someone wants to have a conversation, I think you have to be willing to sit in it. Marcus was already there when I arrived. He had coffee, and he had the expression of someone who has rehearsed what he wants to say, but is not entirely sure the rehearsal covered everything. We were polite. We ordered. He asked about work, I asked about Diane and the kids. We spent a few minutes in the ordinary buffer zone that families use before difficult subjects. Then he said, Farrow thinks contesting it would be a long road. I imagine it would be, I said. He found a second attorney to review it. Someone with more specific estate litigation experience. Marcus turned his coffee cup slightly on the table, a small rotation, the way people handle objects when they need something to do with their hands. That person said the same thing. That grandma's instrument is clean. That she had capacity, that there's no indication of undue influence, that the condition is stated clearly. I nodded. She was 81, Marcus said. I looked at him. She was 81 and sharp, I said. You know she was sharp. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at his coffee. I know, he said, and the way he said it, quietly, without argument, was the closest Marcus had ever come in my experience of him to saying something that cost him something. We sat with that for a moment. I don't want to make this a legal thing, he said finally. I don't think that's what anyone wants. What do you want, Marcus? He looked at me directly then. I want to understand how we got here, he said. I want to understand how Grandma had a whole second instrument, and none of us knew. She went to a separate attorney, I said. In a different county. She filed it separately. She didn't mention it to anyone. But why would she? He stopped. Because she was paying attention, I said. I kept my voice level. I was not angry, not in the way that produces heat. I was something more settled than angry. She had been paying attention for a long time. She saw what the pattern was, and she used the tools available to her to address it. Marcus didn't respond to that directly. I don't think he could. I think he understood on some level what I was saying, and I think understanding it was a thing he was going to have to carry for a while before he knew what to do with it. We finished our coffee. We said we hoped we could find a way forward. We were both telling the truth, and we were both being careful, which is the way our family has always operated, and which I no longer expect to change. Joel's approach was different. Joel called me about 2 weeks after the title office meeting on a Thursday evening. I had just come in from a job site, a boundary dispute between two agricultural properties about 40 minutes outside of Millhaven, a case I had been working for several months that required careful measurement of erosion along a creek bed. I was still in my work clothes, still carrying the particular tiredness of outdoor physical work, when my phone rang. Joel was warm. He was the warmest he had been with me in years, maybe. He asked how I was doing. He asked about the job. He said he knew this whole situation had been a lot, and he wanted me to know that he cared about our relationship and didn't want this to define things between us permanently. I said I appreciated that. Then he said, "I've been thinking about whether there's a way to approach this that works for everyone. I know the property legally, I know what the instrument says. But I also think there might be more flexibility here than the legal situation makes it seem. If the land were sold, and the proceeds were divided 3 ways, you'd be looking at a real number. Something meaningful. And it would keep things from getting complicated." I asked him what he meant by complicated. He said he just meant that managing a property jointly, or having it shift entirely out of one part of the family, could create friction. That a clean financial resolution might actually be better for everyone in the long run, including me. "Joel," I said, "Grandma left me the property. Not the proceeds of it. The property." "I know," he said. "I'm just saying that from a practical standpoint." "She went to a separate attorney," I said. "She filed a separate instrument. She kept it private for 3 years. She did not do that so that the result could be converted into a check and divided." There was a pause. I could hear him thinking, or rearranging, on the other end of the line. "Clara," he said. "She loved you. Nobody's questioning that. But she wrote that codicil before any of this happened, before Dad. She might not have anticipated all the specifics of how." "She anticipated exactly this," I said. "That is why the condition is written the way it is. She anticipated that Dad might update his documents after inheriting. She built the condition around that specific possibility. Robert Keene didn't draft that language by accident." Another pause longer. "She thought about this," I said. "For a long time. She thought about it carefully, and she made her decision, and she documented it properly. What she decided was that if this specific circumstance occurred, the land should come to me. That is what happened. I'm not going to undo her decision." Joel did not call again after that. Not about the property. We have spoken since, briefly, about family logistics, a shared storage unit that needed to be cleared, some paperwork related to my father's business wind-down that required signatures from all 3 of us. Those conversations have been short and functional. We have both been careful. I think we will be careful with each other for a long time. Marcus did not file a formal contest. Whatever the second attorney told him about the likelihood of success, he evidently accepted it, because the estate process moved forward without legal challenge. Over the following 3 months, the standard review period for the estate, during which various creditors and tax obligations were addressed, the instruments were processed and the transfers executed. The townhouse and the business accounts went to Marcus and Joel, as my father's primary will specified.
I did not contest that.
It was not mine to contest. The 43 acres of Crestfield County land, the farmhouse, the barn, the well, the workshop, all of it transferred to me. There was no dramatic moment of finalization. There was a letter from the county recorder's office. There was an updated title document with my name on it. There was a filing number and a date. That was it. That was how Grandma Edna's decision became official, through a letter in an envelope on a Tuesday afternoon, which I opened at my kitchen table and read and set down carefully and sat with for a while before I made myself dinner and went to bed. I have thought about what she knew and when she knew it, more times than I can count. I have thought about whether she saw something specific, some conversation she witnessed, some shift in my father's behavior after she decided to transfer the land to him, or whether it was simpler than that, whether she had simply looked at the pattern of her family with the clear eyes she had always had and made an accurate prediction about what would happen without her there to hold it in place. I think it was probably the latter. I think she had been watching for a long time, and what she saw was what had always been true, that I showed up, that I did not ask for recognition, and that in a family like ours, those two qualities together made it very easy for people to take the showing up for granted and skip the recognition entirely. She understood that this would not correct itself on its own. She decided, quietly and without announcement, to correct it herself. And so she did. The property transferred to me in full. I held the title document in my hands, a surveyor holding a title which felt like a particular kind of rightness, and I read every word of it, including the legal description of the parcel boundaries, which I knew by heart already from all the years of walking that land on Sunday mornings. My name on that document was not a surprise. In some way I had known it was coming from the moment Patricia Holt said there were two instruments on file, or perhaps I had known it longer than that, in the way you sometimes know the location of a boundary marker before you've physically found it, because the geometry of the land tells you where it must be. But knowing something and having it confirmed are different experiences. I sat at my kitchen table with the letter and the title document, and I allowed myself to feel not triumph, not vindication exactly, but something more like, yes, that is where the line was all along.